Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Joint Standing Committee on Judiciary. We have two public hearings this afternoon. But before we get started, we're going to take them in the order they're printed, so 2168 and then 2170. But before we get started, we will begin with committee introductions. Representative Caruso.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome everyone. My name is Elizabeth Caruso. I represent House District 72, which is much of northern Somerset County.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Babin. I represent House District 3, Northeast Sarusa County.
Good afternoon. My name is Ellie Sato. I represent House District 109 in the beautiful town of Gorham.
Hello, I'm Adam Lee. I represent House District 89, which is downtown and New Auburn.
Welcome, I'm Jennifer Poirier. I represent House District 70, which is Skowhegan.
Good afternoon, I'm David Sinclair, here for the people of House District 50, the city of Bath.
Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Dylan Pugh. I represent House District 114, which is part of Portland.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rachel Henderson. I represent the people of House District 78, which are the beautiful towns of Bethel, Byron, Milton, Hanover, Roxbury, and my hometown of Rumford.
Good afternoon. My name is Danny O'Halloran, and I represent the hardworking people in District 20, which is the industrial city of Brewer.
Hi there, I'm Dave Hagan, Senate District 10, 12 towns surrounding Bangor, but not Bangor.
And I'm Amy Kuhn. I represent House District 111 in the town of Falmouth, and I serve as the House Chair of the committee. And we're joined today by our committee clerk, Susan Padette, and our analyst, Eli Murphy. And with that, I'm going to open the public hearing on 2168, which is an act to increase accountability for persons engaged in commercial sexual exploitation and human trafficking and to support victims. I'd welcome the bill sponsor up. We need to just turn your mic on. Thank you, Representative Babin.
That was so lovely. Do we have a sign-in sheet? Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Senator Carney, Representative Kuhn, and distinguished members of the Joint Standing Committee on Judiciary. My name is Representative Holly Stover, and I am honored to represent House District 48. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce LD 2168, an act to increase accountability for persons engaged in commercial sexual exploitation and human trafficking and to support victims. In my professional career, I have had the opportunity to advocate for and provide services to survivors, including during my time as the state's director of domestic and sexual violence. Through that work, I know all too well that these crimes happen right here in our state, in all our communities, even though they are often underreported and underrecognized. Human trafficking and sexual exploitation are currently in the headlines in Maine and nationally nearly every day. Public awareness of those unspeakable crimes is at an all-time high. And we are also witnessing the struggles of survivors, many of whom have had to fight seemingly endless battles just to be heard and believed. LD 2168 is an opportunity for us as lawmakers to stand up for these survivors of sexual violence and to ensure they have access to the support they need. It creates a mechanism to hold perpetrators accountable for the harms they have caused, while also securing necessary funding to help survivors begin the long, difficult process of recovery and healing. The bill requires an additional assessment to be imposed on those convicted of certain sex crimes. The assessment would be a $500 for the first-time offenders and $1,000 for repeat offenders. The intent is for the funds collected to directly benefit victims of these same crimes through the state's existing Victims' Compensation Fund. Specifically, the crimes included in this bill include engaging a person for prostitution, sex trafficking, aggravated sex trafficking, soliciting a child for commercial sexual exploitation, and commercial sexual exploitation of a minor or a person with a mental disability. These are truly atrocious crimes for one human being to commit against another, crimes that cause enduring harm and suffering that stays with survivors for the rest of their lives. As members of this committee know, the Victims' Compensation Fund program offers financial assistance to victims of violent crimes in recognition of the lasting physical and emotional injuries they have endured. The fund covers such expenses as counseling, lost wages, and medical expenses that are not covered by insurance, providing crucial financial support at a time when survivors need it the most. To be clear, this is just one piece of the continuum of ongoing survivor-centered care and services that are critically important and deserve our attention as policymakers. But we know that funds collected because of this bill would go a long way towards helping to ease the financial burden and hardship that survivors suffer. Like many of you, I was fortunate enough to know and serve alongside the late Honorable Lois Reckitt, who worked tirelessly to end the exploitation and trafficking of Maine people. As I have worked to develop the proposal before you here today, I have been inspired by Lois, and I think of her frequently. I was proud to support the survivor-centered legislation she sponsored when she served in this legislature. I truly hope we can come together to further this important work in her memory and in honor of all survivors. Thank you for your consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have for me, and I look forward to working with stakeholders to refine and strengthen this proposal.
Thank you, Representative. See if there are any questions for you, Representative Lee.
I noticed it's dated today, so I'm wondering if you had a chance to review Flack's testimony.
I have not,
Okay.
Are there other?
but I
questions?
will, Representative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. If there are any members of the public who'd like to testify first we'll look for co-sponsors. We do have a co-sponsor. Thank you.
We don't have a sign up here anymore.
No
do we?
sign in, just put your.
Great.
Good. We've got your.
Well, thank you, Representative Kuhn and distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Lori Gramlich, and I represent House District 131, which remains the lovely seaside community of Old Orchard Beach. I am also honored to serve as the Assistant Majority Leader in the House. I am here today as a co-sponsor of LD 2168. I won't read you the title because you know it. Just wanted to give you a little bit of background. Before serving in the legislature, I spent nearly 40 years working in the social services sector, including, I know I don't look like I could have worked, I know Rep. Henderson, I don't look like I could have worked 40 years in the sector, but indeed I have. In the social services sector, including work that brought me into close contact with survivors of sexual abuse and exploitation. In those roles, I saw firsthand the lasting and often devastating impacts of sexual violence, trafficking, and commercial sexual exploitation. Survivors frequently face profound trauma, financial instability, housing insecurity, and long-term physical and mental health needs. Too often, the systems meant to support them are under-resourced and unable to fully meet those needs. This bill represents a clear and thoughtful step toward addressing that imbalance by imposing a modest additional assessment on individuals convicted of serious sex crimes, including sex trafficking, commercial sexual exploitation of children, and the exploitation of individuals with disabilities. This legislation ensures that accountability is meaningful, tied to survivor support. The funds generated by these assessments are directed to the Victims' Compensation Fund and dedicated specifically to meeting the needs of victims and survivors of these crimes. Importantly, this bill recognizes both accountability and fairness. The assessment increases for repeat offenders, reflecting the seriousness of continued harm, while also allowing courts to waive all or part of the assessment based on the person's ability to pay. This balanced approach reinforces responsibility without creating unworkable financial burdens. From my experience working with survivors, as well as my own lived experiences as a survivor, I know that access to compensation can be the difference between stability and continued crisis. Assistance with medical care, counseling, housing, and other basic needs can help survivors begin to heal and reclaim control over their lives. This bill ensures that those who cause harm contribute directly to addressing its consequences. Commercial sexual exploitation and human trafficking are not victimless crimes. They rely on coercion, abuse, and vulnerability. This legislation sends a clear message that Maine will hold offenders accountable while standing firmly with survivors. I urge the committee to vote to pass for this bill to help strengthen Maine's commitment to justice, accountability, and survivor-centered care. Appreciate your time and consideration. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions for you. And I do know that there's some folks coming behind me that might be well suited to answer some of your questions as well.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Representative Gramlich? Not seeing any. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. If there are members of the public who'd like to testify in support of this legislation, please step forward.
Yes, we flip a coin. That's fine.
Yep. Thank you. You just put it right in the basket.
What's that?
The basket's right there.
Basket. Just like you said, the basket.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. I need very clear instructions. Are we under time limit? I mean, like.
We don't have the clock running, but we do normally ask for a 3-minute.
Okay, 3. I'll try to hit that. My name is Michael Shively, and I'm a researcher by training. And for over 30 years, I've been an evaluator of criminal justice policies of all kind. But for more than 20 years, my main focus has been on exactly the kinds of issues that are addressed by LD 2168, which is prostitution and sex trafficking. And I had a series of grants with the federal government for like 20 years, just back-to-back grants studying these issues. And my personal library now has about 100,000 source documents on prostitution and sex trafficking. And I've done research on all 50 states, including Maine, and I'll talk a little bit about some research we did here. But I've been tracking demand reduction efforts throughout the country, and I've tracked it in over 5,300 cities and counties, and 88 of those are in Maine. And I can say without hesitation, this bill deserves support. I strongly endorse it. It should be passed. You can see the details in the testimony that I'm handing out, but the basic idea is this, that everything starts with the buyers. You know, no buyers, no traffickers, no buyers, no pimps, no buyers, no victims. You know, 100% of the revenue that funds the entire mess comes from the pocket of buyers. One thing they've proven is that they have disposable income. And one thing I've looked at throughout the country is the fees and fines. And they can easily come up with $1,000, right? I've got all kinds of examples I could discuss with you, but in Norfolk, Virginia, just through a municipal ordinance, they have a $1,500 fine. They made guys go to a John School education program. It wasn't voluntary. They seized their cars. They had to pay to get their cars back. And they also had to do community service, and they had to pay $40 a day for community service. So they were easily spending upwards of $2,500. In neighboring states like Massachusetts, the maximum fine is $5,000. New Hampshire, Connecticut is $2,000. And I looked at some other small population states, and you know, Montana has $5,000. They can come up with it, right? So the issue of can they afford it? Not all of them can. So what some cities and what some states have is a sliding scale. So they have to prove income to get relief. And like San Francisco, for example, they had a $1,000 fee, and they had a sliding scale based on income, and the average they actually collected was $750. So there are all kinds of ways of going about it, but it needs to be done. Now, again, San Francisco, I know it's a big city, so maybe it doesn't feel comparable, but that big city has half the population that the state of Maine does. And they were arresting over 1,000 buyers a year, and they were getting this money from them. And the survivor programs in that city over a 10-year period got over $1 million directly from the buyers. So if there's a commitment on the part of law enforcement to actually enforce the law against buying, and they make those arrests, it can turn into real money. Even if it doesn't, and so far in Maine, it doesn't look like, you know, it's, you know, there's not a not a great deal of arrest of sex buyers throughout the state. And initially it could be, more symbolic than anything, but I think that counts too. And it can be a step towards getting more serious about arresting the buyers. This model that you have, this equality model law, it becomes de facto full decriminalization if you don't arrest buyers.
If I could
Yeah.
ask you to wrap up your,
Yep.
your testimony.
So I just want to make one point that's in here, but we did one thing that shows that this basic model works if you use it. We threw an ad up, Epic Project, it's a nonprofit, and Street Grace, another nonprofit, both of them put up ads at different points in time and ran them in Portland, and they ran them for the exact same amount of time in Bangor. One time there was a 10-to-1 difference. Bangor had 10 times the number of buyers identified than Portland. So the next time it was more like a 3-to-1 difference, and Bangor's smaller. So the basic idea is we know that Bangor, one thing we know about it, they don't arrest buyers. One thing we know about the Portland area, they have a history of arresting buyers and making that public.
All right, let's see if there are
So
any
that's
questions
it.
for you.
right, thank
Representative
you.
Lee?
Thank you, and thank you for the data and information that you provided. I can see in the Portland Bangor example that there is a difference between the two with respect to the arrests that are made.
Mhm.
And so what I'm trying to figure out is there a disincentive that's provided based purely on based on an increase in the fine amount, essentially? Is there data that you have that proves that the economic disincentive is effective?
Well, short answer is no, I don't have, there's not science behind it. I can't show you studies that say this, reduces prostitution by X amount. I can't. The general concept, the more severe the punishment, the more the deterrence in general. But I think probably the difference between 500, 1,000, 1,500, it's probably not the deal breaker. It's for different reasons that are also very good reasons, which is justice and fairness and helping the people that these guys hurt, right? So, the deterrence effect aside, there are plenty of reasons to want to support getting more money out of them.
Any other questions, committee members? Senator Hagan?
Thank you very much, and thank you for all of this. I love to be able to read these things. Are there other studies in Maine than the thing that you talked about with Bangor and Portland? And are there incentives for police agencies that are not conducting the South Portland activities to reduce this horrible thing that law enforcement can share or do, or more studies? And then
Not in Maine. I don't have more research in Maine.
Yeah.
In fact, Maine's real tough because it's really hard to even make sense of the arrest data. If you go to 3 different places and you're trying to find out how many buyers get arrested, I can find you 4, I can find you 40, for the same time period. And so I don't know what's going on with the data, but that's why we did this. It's like, look, we can throw an ad up. It's not responsive to policing effort or budgets or anything. So throw an ad up. If the buyers are there, they're going to respond, and they did, right? So that's why we did it that way. There's plenty of research from around the country that finds the general effectiveness of arresting buyers, ideally also educating them, also disclosing their identities, because that's a big disincentive. It's the biggest disincentive, and getting money from them for restorative justice. So there's plenty of research showing that works. One thing that I think you can argue is that increase in the fines or adding a surcharge or assessment, whatever you want to call it, it can incentivize communities, right? Because one thing we know for sure, survivor support services are tragically and extremely under-supported, underfunded. And this is a way to get a revenue stream there. The other thing is, I think doing studies like this where you just say, you got a problem here. Maybe they're not calling police, but that doesn't mean the victims aren't also getting hurt, right? So if you got 95 buyers respond to one ad on one platform in 2 days in Bangor, right? They're just, that means they are in the business of buying sex, and people that are bought for sex get hurt. It's just a matter of time, and some of them die. So I think that, it does incentivize them to think about this as a way, there's a benefit. It can turn into real money if they're serious about it. And
Thank you. I
the-
think you've answered the question. Let's see if there are
Yeah,
any
thank
other
you. Appreciate
questions.
it.
Representative Sinclair?
Thank you, Madam Chair. From your perspective, and I understand there can be a number of different perspectives on the same issue, but I'm asking you because you're here and because you've done some research. From your perspective, what is the wisdom of framing this as an additional assessment rather than as restitution? Restitution, of course, would go directly to the specific victim of a particular act. Where's the trade-off there, and why does the approach suggested in this bill make more sense to you?
I'm actually going to defer on that question simply because you got someone in the room who's going to be able to answer it far better than I. Tricia Grant, does survivor support services, right? And she understands that. I do know that, what you call it matters in the law, just in terms of how it functions, right? And I do know that in general, direct restitution can be kind of hard to administer, because it's a person by person thing. You're a victim of this person, that direct restitution can be kind of hard to manage. It's kind of a simple approach. If you just say all the buyers put money in a pot, that pot of money gets used to help victims in general, not necessarily just the particular ones. But Tricia, you can talk about that. If you want to ask her, I would suggest that. Yeah.
Any other questions? Representative Caruso?
Madam Chair, thank you, sir, for this information and for your printout here. Is you're talking about law enforcement in Portland and Bangor, is that the PD or the sheriff's department, or are they working in unity?
It can be either, and it can also be federal, right? Federal agencies, what they tend to do in this state in particular is kind of one-off investigations. So some sex buyers get arrested, it isn't necessarily through a sting. It's because there's a guy that's an employer telling the servers in his restaurant that he wants to pay them for sex, right? They complain, that gets investigated. So that's not a proactive effort to try to find out, to draw buyers. And, if they're minors, if there's some sort of interstate commerce, there's a lot of things that create a federal interest in it. So you get some federal cooperation, usually just collaborate and coordinate. Some of the ones that I've tracked, I've actually got a table that's got like all the main cities and counties that have ever had this demand reduction stuff happen. And, it's a combination, sometimes the county, sometimes the city. I know South Portland Police Department does it. I know Cumberland County, they've also been, staged the stings. So it's a combination.
Just to follow up, you're referring to Portland, then you refer to South Portland, you were talking about Bangor. So it's not necessarily, you're not talking about specific cases where they're using the PD. It's just in general, law enforcement, not necessarily proactive police operations. It's law enforcement operations.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience wishing to speak in support, please come to the podium.
Good afternoon, Senator Carney, Representative Kuhn, and members of the Judiciary Committee. Sorry. My name is Tricia Grant, and I am the Executive Director of Just Love Worldwide, a nonprofit organization based in Westbrook, Maine, and I am a resident of Auburn. I am here today to support LD 2168, an act to increase accountability for persons engaged in commercial sexual exploitation and human trafficking, and to support victims. As someone who has worked directly with survivors of trafficking and speaks from my own experience as a survivor, I have witnessed firsthand the devastating impact of commercial sexual exploitation. For a year and a half, I was trafficked here in Maine starting at the age of 15. During the first 15 months of my exploitation, I never saw any money exchanged between my trafficker and the buyers. I knew my trafficker was receiving money, but I had no idea how much. In the last 3 months of my trafficking, I was brought to strip clubs where I learned from others how to steal, and I put that in quotations, some of the money that was given to us while on stage. Just from what I stole in that short time, I accumulated $38,000. That number still blows my mind. It demonstrates the extent to which these exploiters are willing to pay for access to vulnerable individuals. If these men can afford to pay $38,000 on a 15-year-old, they can certainly afford a $1,000 fine to support exit services for the survivors. In collaboration with Steve Dyer, a professor at Thomas College and former law enforcement, our nonprofit runs Maine's only diversion program, and we've had 57 participants come through our 10-week program. And I can assure you that most of them have no problem paying the fee for our course and the court fines. LD 2168 is crucial because it increases financial accountability for those convicted of purchasing sex and participating in trafficking-related offenses. The funds generated from these fines will be directed into the Victims' Compensation Fund, which is essential for meeting the needs of survivors like myself. This bill aligns with evidence-based approaches that prioritize reducing demand for sexual exploitation by increasing consequences for buyers while ensuring that victims are not criminalized. Passage of LD 2168 would mean more consistent, victim-centered funding for survivors across the state. It provides a targeted, practical way to hold exploiters accountable while strengthening Maine's response to trafficking, and we are being watched right now. By supporting this bill, the legislature can help ensure that survivors have access to the resources they need to rebuild their lives. I urge you to vote ought to pass on LD 2168. Thank you, Representative Stouffer, for always standing beside survivors. And thank you for all your time and for considering the voices of survivors in this critical matter. I often wish that these formal settings could be opportunities to sit and have real conversations. So please reach out for clarification or more information. I am willing to answer questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Representative Sinclair?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. So as I asked the speaker before you, the VCF funds are made available to victims of any and all crimes for which there's a conviction, not just specifically for the crimes that are being targeted by this bill. Why is this bill, from your perspective, better framed as an additional assessment rather than an anonymized, it's not an easy word for me to say, an anonymized restitution order going directly to that specific victim?
I think that that's something that really would require other legal minds to break down the why behind it and the how it works. I offer services and I engage in testimony like this, and I also run our diversion program. So I really think that that's a conversation that I'd love to sit down with anybody and have, and really break down like the best practices of how to do this effectively. That would be my best answer to you. I apologize, it's not a direct answer to your question, but.
Thank you. Any other questions, committee members? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone left in the room who'd like to testify in support? All right, I think we do have some folks online. If you could please raise your electronic hand and keep it raised until you've had an opportunity to provide your testimony. And this is testimony in support of the legislation. Senator Carney? Oh, yes.
Thank you very much, Representative Kuhn. My name is Ann Carney, everyone. I represent Senate District 29 and am happy to serve as chair of this wonderful committee. I will be in and out this afternoon, but I appreciate the chance to be here and to introduce myself.
All right, welcome. Please go ahead with your testimony.
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker, Representative Stover, honorable members of the committee. My name is Nate Walsh, and I am a resident of Freeport. My day job is that I'm an assistant district attorney in Androscoggin County, serving in prosecutorial District 3, and I have been the human trafficking prosecutor for a little more than the last decade. Prior to joining Androscoggin County, I briefly worked in Cumberland County, also as a human trafficking prosecutor, following in the shoes of then Deputy District Attorney Meg Elam. So I'm here today to support the sentiment of this bill for greater accountability for people who pay for sex. as I believe one of the prior individuals, Mr. Shively testified, this is about accountability and that people wouldn't sell people if people wouldn't buy people. Engaging a person for prostitution is a crime committed by individuals who have disposable income because they're paying for sex. And so that's really where we're talking about increased fines as a way to try to help those who have been harmed by this crime. So just generally where we are, engaging a person for prostitution is currently a Class E crime, meaning it's the lowest classification of crime within our criminal justice system. So Class E's are punishable by up to 6 months in jail and $1,000 fine, but the legislature has imposed a mandatory victims compensation fund assessment for first-time offenders of $1,000 for a first offense and $2,000 for each subsequent offense. So that goes to the Victim Compensation Fund, which funds all victims of crime. And so I think what we're experiencing currently is that there are shortfalls in budgets across the state. Federal money drying up is really hurting some of the service agencies that offer direct support to survivors of trafficking. I believe that there's a bill currently before the legislature to fund Preble Street anti-trafficking services, somewhere in the tune of $300,000 because of federal funds that have been eliminated because of federal shortfalls. And so I think we're looking for ways to help those who have been affected by this crime. I fully support Preble Street and the work that they do. It's just that I'm trying to find ways to support survivors, whether they're in Fort Kent or Kittery. And so, and where I work in Androscoggin County, I work along Safe Voices and Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Services, who both do invaluable work for survivors of trafficking, and they work closely with my office in my cases. And so it's a way to support those survivors and those agencies is where I'm concerned and how we can best do that. I think that Mr. Shively has also showed some data about posting online advertisements and then collecting the data of who responds that shows that police operations and demand reduction operations are effective if they're conducted. And so in the southern part of Maine, Portland, in Lewiston, Auburn, we routinely conduct operations. And so I would lump Androscoggin in with that Portland data to show that, it's been reduced as opposed to the northern parts where, law enforcement hasn't been as proactive or had the opportunity. So I'd also urge for the committee to find ways that they might be able to fund law enforcement for statewide coordination and how to better serve people and have equal access to justice across the state in terms
Thank you.
of.
Thank you for your testimony. I know you can't see the clock. Committee members, are there any questions? Representative Lee?
Thank you for joining us today. I don't know the answer to this question. Are there any other crimes that have sort of the earmark that this does, that the additional assessment has to be used specific to the crimes within the victim compensation fund?
Sure, it's a very good question. That's something that we don't typically see in Maine, and usually your fines are assessed to the general fund. I believe that there are exceptions within Title 12 for the Maine Warden Service, where if there are certain provisions of violations of Title 12 or watercraft or things of that nature, where I believe the legislature has directed or the commissioner of IFW has directed that those go back to fund the work of the Maine Warden Service. But I'm not familiar of other areas where that's been done. I did discuss with a colleague who has a little bit more tenure, ADA Pat Mater, who said that she believes that there was a historical basis for that, where it was determined that the thought was that we didn't want it to appear as though we were, assessing fines from defendants to fund the law enforcement agencies that were enforcing those. So I think there was a concern about that a little bit. But whereas this is the assessments would go back to be dispersed through either victim services or through, agencies, I think that's kind of the thought there. But yes, to answer your question, I believe that there are some provisions of Title 12 that do allow for fines collected through the courts to go back to fund a specific purpose. I do expect that would cause some issues with the actual court system and how their fine collections are set up.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you for your testimony. I think we have one other person online who would like to testify in support. All right. If you could please activate your camera.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Thank you. Dear Senator Carney, Representative Kuhn, and members of the Joint Judiciary Committee. My name is Bella Paraki, and I'm from Stratham, New Hampshire, and also attended Berwick Academy in South Berwick, Maine for high school. I currently serve as the Policy Associate at World Without Exploitation. World We is the country's largest anti-trafficking coalition with over 175 NGO members. We unite communities across the country to advocate for policies that result in permanent solutions to combat human trafficking, sexual exploitation, and their underlying causes. We also work directly with and on behalf of hundreds of survivors across the country. World We worked closely with Representative Lois Reckitt to pass the first law in the nation that decriminalizes people who are being bought and sold in prostitution. We believe Maine is on the right side of history in passing this law, which is in line with the legal framework known as the survivor model or equality model. This legislative framework decriminalizes people being bought and sold, prioritizes services and support instead of arrest, and holds the people causing harm, such as exploiters and sex buyers, accountable. Today, we are here in support of LD 2168 in order to advance and further the efforts to bring the survivor model to Maine. The global sex trade is fueled by the exploitation of vulnerable women and children through power imbalances and coercion by sex buyers who tend to be wealthy men. A 2024 study conducted by leading experts on prostitution reported that 98% of prostituted women had been raped by sex buyers or pimps. A Colorado medical study found that 92% of women in the sex trade report having been raped, shot, strangled, burned, beaten, stabbed, or punched. Violence is not an exception in prostitution, it is the norm. Prostitution and sex trafficking are inextricably linked. Demand from sex buyers fuels sexual exploitation and directly drives prostitution and trafficking. LD 2168 seeks to create an additional fee for perpetrators of this group of crimes and to ensure that those funds collected from sex buyers are directed to support victims and survivors. By providing additional support for critical services and resources in Maine, individuals are given the opportunity to escape this vicious cycle, leave their abusers, and have a new chance at life. Thank you for your support and consideration.
Thank you for your testimony. Let's see if there are any questions, committee members. I'm not seeing any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right now, if there's anyone in the room who would like to testify in opposition to 2168. Not seeing anyone. I think we do have a couple of folks online. If you're online, you want to testify in opposition, please raise your electronic hand and leave it raised. Thank you. First, we'll have Maggie Zell, if you could activate your camera. Hello, welcome.
Thank you. Senator Carney, Representative Kuhn, and esteemed members of the Joint Standing Committee of the Judiciary. My name is Maggie Zoll, a lifelong resident of Portland, and I'm here today on behalf of SWIRL, Sex Workers Inspiring Rights and Liberation, Maine's first human rights-based sex worker advocacy organization, to oppose LD 2168. I want to begin by naming an important truth. It's possible for well-intentioned people to disagree about how to best address human trafficking and how to best keep people engaged in sexual labor, whether consensually or through coercion safe. We believe the bill comes from a sincere desire to reduce harm. We share that goal. But when we're crafting policy intended to create safety, it's critical that we set aside what feels right and look honestly at what the evidence shows actually works. With sexual violence and exploitation, what feels like common sense, especially when it comes to punishment, and what increases safety are very often not the same thing. This bill seeks accountability from buyers and attempts to convert that accountability into financial penalties for the benefit of the victims. I understand the impulse. These are serious harms. It feels right to punish people who cause them. But punishing buyers does not make people in the sex trade safer. What the data and lived experience consistently show is that when we increase legal or financial pressure on buyers, they do not absorb that risk. They displace it. Buyers respond by demanding faster transactions, resisting screening, pushing encounters in a more isolated location, and exerting more power over the terms of the exchange. The risk always lands on the least powerful person, the seller, whether that person is a consensual adult sex worker, someone engaged in survival sex work, or someone currently experiencing trafficking. Risk does not disappear, it is transferred. And when conditions become more dangerous, people are less likely to disclose coercion, less likely to seek help, and less likely to be in a position to identify traffickers or abusive third parties. Safety is what enables identification. Safety is what enables exit. I also want to situate this bill in the context of LD 1435, which Maine passed in 2023. That law created a unique compromise-based framework, one that attempted to balance enforcement-oriented approaches with human rights and health-based approaches. It partially decriminalized people selling sex without layering on new punitive measures for buyers. Maine is now a test case. This framework has not yet been fully implemented, evaluated, or assessed for long-term outcomes or unintended consequences. Changing the enforcement landscape now, before we understand what is working and what is not, will make meaningful evaluation much harder and risk destabilizing a fragile system in ways that disproportionately harm marginalized people. This concern is echoed by the Criminal Law Advisory Commission, which has raised objectives to treating certain offenses differently based on political appeal rather than coherent criminal law principles. Creating new crime-specific financial penalties because they feel morally satisfying sets troubling precedent and undermines consistency in our legal framework. Finally, I want to be very clear about something important. Children and adults are different and they require different legal responses. Sexual exploitations of minors is real, serious, and already illegal. Adult consensual sex work is a separate issue. Collapsing these realities into a single enforcement framework weakens our response to trafficking, erases adult consent and agency, and misdirects resources. Survivor-centered practice depends on context, self-identification, and choice in how harm is named and addressed. Laws that treat all sexual labor as exploitation reduce disclosure, increase fear, and makes it harder, not easier, to identify actual coercion. Multiple organizations that are responsible specifically for trafficking responses in Maine are not present in this hearing, which highlights the gaps in the potential legislation. LD 2168 is well-intentioned, but its impact would be to make people less safe. We urge this committee to pause, to evaluate Maine's existing framework before adding new punitive layers, and to pursue approaches that are grounded in evidence, precision, and the lived realities of the people most affected. We thank you for your time and
The
consideration.
mic's not on. Thank you for your testimony. Let's see if there's any questions. Committee members? Representative Lee?
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. I'm trying to puzzle through something you said, and just hoping you can maybe put some more meat on the bones of it. The partial decriminalization process, which I was a big proponent of, you're saying it could be adversely affected by the increased assessment here. Can you maybe flesh that out for me? Tell me what you mean by that. How would that be affected adversely?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the question. I want to go back to the fact that Maine is the only state in the country that's currently operating under this. And so we believe that that framework has not been accurately assessed yet. So we can't say with any certainty, really, whether it's going to cause more harm or less harm. And we would really want to ensure that we have the empirical evidence to be able to say that. So when we are supporting sex workers and we are supporting people dealing with trafficking, we have the evidence to do that appropriately.
Thank you. And can I ask, did you submit your testimony online?
I did.
Thank you.
Of course.
Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for your time.
I think we have one other person online to testify in opposition. If you could please activate your camera. Hello, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Cleary. I am an attorney and an advocate for survivors of trafficking and consensual adult sex workers. I also look at policy nationally, but with a specific focus on New England and the Northeast. I want to echo what the prior speaker said. I know we all agree that it's critical to have funds available to support survivors. My one concern is that this also includes engaging a person for prostitution for many of the reasons that were stated by the prior speaker. I also want to point out that when this bill was in front of this committee, when LD 1435 was in front of this committee in 2023, the committee amended out some language that conflated adult consensual sex work with the exploitation of minors and with human trafficking. And so I don't think it's in the spirit of that decision by this legislature to further that conflation. It seemed like it was not the intention then. And so I think it's important to stay true to the original intent. There are dangers to increasing penalties for clients and not making a distinction between adult consensual sex work and horrific crimes of trafficking and exploitation of children and vulnerable people. It's just not great policy, especially so early in this phase post 2023 NLD 1435. So I urge you just to amend out that inclusion of engaging a person for prostitution.
Thank you, Representative Lee.
Am I properly understanding your testimony that if we were to amend the bill to strike the section 853B, engaging a person for prostitution, that you would not be opposed to the bill?
That's really my primary concern with it. I'm not sure that this is the most effective way to raise funds. And frankly, I do continue to think that, this ongoing conversation about how to deal with exploitation should be ongoing. But I think the primary problem with this bill is that conflation between engaging a person for prostitution and exploiting a child, a vulnerable person, or engaging in human trafficking.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, not seeing any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the committee room who'd like to testify neither for nor against? All right, not seeing anyone. I don't think we have anyone left online. Actually, don't. Okay. So if you're online and you'd like to testify neither for nor against, please raise your electronic hand and leave it raised. Okay, thank you. I think that is all the testimony on this matter, so we'll close the public hearing on 2168. Yes, Representative Lee.
Just a request for the work session on that last bill. If we could have maybe a response from the judicial branch as to the effects on administering the victim compensation fund and how it will be affected.
Thank you. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kind of along the lines of the question that Representative Lee asked earlier about what other parts of law direct funds to the victim compensation fund. If we could kind of get a list of that. I'm sure you collected that, Eli, but just a reiteration.
Senator Carney.
To add to that list of questions, Eli, there is a provision in this bill that says that the funds transferred pursuant to this section have to meet the needs of the crimes described in this section. And I guess my question is, could you please ask if it is possible with the current software to track that? Thank you.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess this last request here would be, CLAC had made a statement that there was no other place where there was an opportunity for there to be a waiver of these funds. And I don't know if, but this offers their opportunity for a waiver. If there is a way to actually check on CLAC's work to ensure that that's accurate, to make sure that there's no opportunity for waivers anywhere else. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have all that, Eli? Okay. All right, thank you.
The moment of the legislative session the committee members have been waiting for has arrived. We are going to do a public hearing on the errors bill, which is LD 2170. It's being presented by our colleague, Representative Kuhn. Please present.
Thank you, Senator Carney, esteemed colleagues. I'm Amy Kuhn. I represent House District 111 in the town of Falmouth. And it is my distinct honor to introduce LD 2170, which is an act to correct inconsistencies, conflicts, and errors in the laws of Maine on behalf of the reviser of statutes. Thank you. If I can return to the horse show.
You may return to the horseshoe. Is there anyone present in the committee room who wishes to speak in support of LD 2170, the errors bill? Seeing none, if you are online and you wish to speak in support of the errors bill, please raise your electronic hand and keep it raised until you've provided your testimony. And if you're in the committee room and you wish to speak in opposition to the errors bill, please step forward. If you are online and you wish to speak in opposition to the errors bill, please raise your electronic hand. And finally, if you are in the committee room or online and wish to speak neither for nor against the errors bill, please step forward or raise your hand. And seeing none, we will close the public hearing on the errors bill.
For a couple seconds on this bill, just kind of guess it.
Mhm. And so committee members, Eli is going to give us a little bit of an introduction to the errors bill and orient us. It is going to be this year, as always, a fascinating body of work to get involved in. And I really encourage everybody to volunteer for the subcommittee.
Good afternoon, everyone. And then we're going to switch to some language review after this, so we'll swap this all stuff around. For those of you who remember, the errors bill is a whole lot of fun looking at things like cross-references that either are out of date or have been changed, things like that. One of the processes with this bill that is different than all the other bills is that my office takes a crack at it first. And so what we are doing currently is members of my office are going through and giving a first pass at the various sections that relate to their individual committee sections. We will then kind of give a full pass and put together, for those of you who are on the committee or on the subcommittee before, we'll put together a binder for you to review. Generally, the way that this committee has gone forward with that is that you elect or you appoint a subcommittee. Sometimes you'll take a weekend and go through those binders. What we are thinking is, and then after you go through as the subcommittee, you will report back to the full committee, and that point we'll have what we normally would see as a work session. What we are looking at time-wise, excuse me, is my office is hoping to have those binders finished. We are going to try and get that finished by the 13th. That's a Friday, so hoping maybe that weekend we can get it to the subcommittee or early the next week. But so really, I guess the direction for the committee is to pick the subcommittee and get ready and plan a time for you to review that before we then come back and have our full work session. As with the errors bill, and this is some of this is a bit more information than you need now, but there's the printed bill, which is what you see in your folders there. There's often supplemental sections that the revisor's office, between the time that it's printed or that are kind of reviewed separately from the printed bill you have in front of you. There are supplemental sections that would be treated the same way. And so if the committee wanted to add them, it would be added as an amendment. But so you will see, whether you're on the subcommittee or the full committee after the subcommittee reviews it, you will see some additional language. I think there's maybe 6-ish. Yeah, so there's, a handful of extra sections that will be coming that you will see in your materials as well. But so I guess the direction for the committee is decide a subcommittee, and then we will get you the materials in binder form as soon as we have them ready.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions on the process that Eli just outlined? Representative Lee?
Do we know which analyst will be working with us?
It is that going to decide whether you're on the subcommittee or not?
It very well may.
In the past, it has been, some of you will remember Sam and Anna, the HHS analysts. They are helping the two of us this year, but because of the timing of it, I think it will predominantly be handled by the two of us. You may see some other analysts in and out helping as well, but I think Janet and I are both going to be tag teaming this bill together.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. I would like to ask committee members to self-identify if you are interested in serving on the errors subcommittee. All right, we have Representative Sato, we have Representative Lee. Okay, and we have Representative Henderson, Representative Sinclair, and I will certainly add myself to that as well as Senator Carney. Any? Yeah, many hands. All right, any other committee members interested in joining? All right. Thank you, everyone, and we'll look forward to getting those binders in time for the holiday weekend. Following that, I think we do have some language reviews coming, so we'll just take a minute for that transition. Janet, are you ready for us?
They go up now?
Yep.
All right, Eli.
All
Right
right,
ahead when you're ready.
Soupy is passing out two amendments. Representative Sinclair, which one do you have in front of you? What's the LD? Oh, you have both of them. Cool. Okay, so here, you have both of them. We can start with LD 1997 as you were getting that out. That was LD 1997, an act to authorize the issuance of securities to modernize and consolidate certain court facilities.
Do you want to wait a moment until everybody has it? Thanks.
Sue's passing out is LD 1997. And so you will remember at the work session, we did have a preliminary fiscal note. This was, the committee voted unanimously, ought to pass. There was a preliminary fiscal note with this language. The final fiscal note has that same exact language. And so really this becomes an ought to pass as amended just to incorporate that fiscal note language.
Great. Any questions, committee members?
Effective.
Did you have a question, Representative Crusoe?
No, I just said it becomes an amendment to incorporate the fiscal note. I said, which is none.
Yeah.
And I said that, Billy. Yeah.
Right.
Sorry.
The fiscal note has no fiscal impact at this time. However, because it is positing the potential for new court facilities, sometime down the future, there may be increased costs in running a facility. You know, if you're improving a building, you might add on heat costs or add on those sorts of things that can't necessarily be conceptualized now, but improving buildings may have other costs down the line.
Great. Committee members, is this amendment acceptable, this language review? All right, thank you.
And the second one you have in front of you is LD 2032. This was an act to amend the extreme risk protection order. This bill had no fiscal impact, which you see on that green sheet. However, the committee did amend the bill to add the emergency preamble, which you have before you now. I can either read it to you or you can read it for yourself. But this was the language that you provided in verbal form when we voted that bill 2 weeks ago.
So let's just take a moment, give people a chance to read it.
And this as well was a unanimous ought to pass as amended.
Yeah. Committee members, any questions or concerns about that language? Looks good. All right.
Thank you.
Let's go.
Just as a reminder, while the papers are going around, when you see it on pink, that's the version that should be ready to go out as a final committee amendment after it's gone through the revisor's office. Sometimes you'll see a yellow amendment. Those are preliminary reviews, which we do when you didn't have language in front of you when you voted. So we don't always do a preliminary review because you might have had language at the time you voted. And then purple is just a special one for today. So the first review I have is LD 374. This was a unanimous amendment by the Judiciary Committee, which created a study about equity and the compensation of prosecutors and public defenders in this state. So this was one when you voted, you didn't have language. We did a preliminary review and you asked to make a few changes. So I'm going to show you where they are. On page 1 in the middle whereas clause, it originally talked about properly developing or developing a proper system, something. The word proper has been removed wherever it was in an offensive location prior. Page 2 in the Constitution of the Commission, paragraph 4 talks about someone employed by a law school. This was originally a law school professor, but with your request, I changed it to someone employed by a law school in the state and who has experience in career placement for law students. On the off chance that it's not always a professor that does that job, I took the word professor out just in case. And then also you asked that the chairs be from the two parties that hold the largest number of seats in the legislature. And unless we said that the Senate president would assign from the majority party and the House Speaker, the second party, or vice versa, the only other way to do that is to ask them to coordinate, which is what I did so that they could figure out which was the best way to move forward. I have been told that similar types of revisions have been included in studies in the past and they've been taken out on the study table. So if this is something that matters to you, you might want to advocate to the folks who decide the study table to explain why that matters to you a lot.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Janet, for the revisions. I'll just say that portion does matter to me as a member of the minority party. I think makes sense as to why. But also, I think just objectively to the fact that this shouldn't be a partisan issue. This shouldn't be a partisan discussion. And as with legislators, I think that can be a tendency sometimes. I think it's in part important to have that kind of a quote unquote balance in power. So I don't know if the rest of the committee's on board, but I would strongly advocate to appropriations that piece stay in there.
And it would be the Ledge Council, just so you know.
When you suggested advocating, did you mean legislators speaking individually to members of Ledge Council?
I don't really know how the study table process works. I've just been warned in the past, I'm not sure how distant, something like this has been removed. So I don't know how you normally interact with Ledge Council about study bills, but maybe include that line if it's important to you. And I'm not
Okay.
saying you need to advocate. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you. Representative Sinclair?
I was really happy to hear Representative Henderson say what she just said, and I very strongly agree with her. I wonder if we could just quickly poll the committee, if that is a committee consensus, maybe we as a committee could more efficiently just reach out to Ledge Council and say, this actually matters to us, which might save them some time and avoid having them hear from a large number of us.
And how are you suggesting that sentiment be expressed?
Look around the horseshoe, maybe an informal show of hands.
I meant, how do you want, if there is a committee consensus, how are you suggesting that's communicated?
Sorry, I missed the tail end of your question.
If there is a committee consensus
Yep.
to move forward on that basis, are you suggesting a manner of communicating that to
I
Ledge
would think a
Council?
letter to Ledge Council indicating what the committee consensus is, if in fact there is one.
Okay. Committee members, any discussion on that? Senator Hagan?
Sorry, I had to be out of the room, so I don't know what we're talking about.
Oh, sure. So we're on language review for LD 374, which is to establish a commission to look at parity and salary and, well, really overall compensation between assistant attorneys general and public defenders. And in our committee discussion, we had decided that the chairs, there should be two co-chairs, one from each party. And Janet has just shared with us that at some point in the past, something like this went to the study table and the requirement for bipartisan leadership was removed. That's where we are. A suggestion that if there's consensus if there's unanimity on the committee, that we move forward with a letter advising the study table that we'd like it to stay in. Yeah. Yep.
Since this is a unanimous committee amendment, maybe it makes more sense to see if anybody objects to such a letter.
Yeah. Committee members, is there anyone who objects to taking that approach?
Okay,
Not
then
seeing
I
any.
would request permission to work with Representative Henderson on the language. And we'll get it back to you, probably not right away, because this has to get to the study table first. So,
All right, is that acceptable, everyone? Okay. Thank you.
the next one is purple. And this, you may recall, you've voted to report out several committee bills over the past several weeks. All of them, except this one in front of you, you have asked to have them referred back to you for a public hearing and a work session. This purple one was the exception. So this is an act to update the laws governing the geographic boundaries, between certain judicial divisions in Aroostook County. It makes the changes that you see in the language of the bill. It's called page 1, but it's the back of the front page of the packet. That adjusts the geographic boundaries between Western Aroostook and Eastern Aroostook divisions of the Main District Court. And the summary explains sort of why you're not asking for it to come back, that you authorized the closure of the Madawaska District Court, you authorized the chief judge to reallocate municipalities between Fort Kent and Caribou for the convenience of the public, and that this bill would just implement the changes the chief judge made in November.
All right, and this one was also unanimous.
Yes, so you have the fiscal information, which you have to have before a committee bill that will be voted straight on the floor, and it doesn't have a fiscal note. And the back is the vote sheet.
Thank you. Committee members, any comments on that or questions? All right, are we good to move ahead? Okay.
So the last one is preliminary language review.
Is this the probate court?
Yes.
What if we pass those around and then we'll just take a quick break before we dig into this, because this is going to take a little bit. Representative Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the purple one, I'm only seeing an LR. Did I miss that part of the conversation?
Yeah, so
Or-
this is going to be printed as a committee bill. It has not
Oh,
been
right.
printed yet, so it doesn't have an LDS.
Right, thank you kindly.
All right, committee members, let's take the preliminary language review and then just take a quick five-minute break and we'll come back.
This is 1766. It's probate court and it's a nice thick packet coming your way.
Committee members, we're just going to wait about another 5 minutes and then we'll be able to get started. All right. Committee members, welcome back. We're going to move on to language review on 1766. Oh, we need to wait for the TV. Sorry.
Sorry. Good idea. All set.
So this is preliminary language review on LD 1766, an act to incorporate probate judges into the main judicial branch. This was a divided report with 8 folks voting in favor, 5 against, and Representative Dana absent, and I believe it's split on party lines. The reason you have a yellow proposed amendment before you is for the public hearing, and then during the work session, you had the summary of Senator Carney's proposed amendment, but you didn't have the text in front of you. So this is the text as it's been sent to the revisor's office for processing. So Part A of the bill, which would take effect as 90 days after the session, just like any other law, would continue to contain the legislative intent that you're repealing the provision of the Constitution of Maine that was contingently repealed in 1967, and then it would add a transition provision that the Supreme Judicial Court requested to be clear that they have the authority to issue orders and adopt or amend any rules to make the goal of the bill occur. Part B also takes effect 90 days after the session, and the reason this happens before the bill even contemplates a new state probate court existing is that if you repeal the constitutional provision, you've gotten rid of the election under the Constitution for registers and judges. So one thing that Part B does is it provides for those as a matter of statute along the transition plan that Senator Carney's amendment had proposed. And then also by putting in the appointment power of the governor for the judges, hopefully this will be in effect before the first day that the state judges exist. So hopefully this gives her or whoever the new governor is, the leeway to appoint those folks in enough advance time to get them on the bench by the day that that court opens, as it were. So if you look here, a lot of the changes throughout are the changes in the timeline, which were summarized at the public hearing and the work session. And so if you look on page 3, York, Kennebec, Somerset, and Aroostook counties would be the first counties served by the state probate court, with the rest of the counties. And those 4, counties would be served on January 1st, 2029. The rest of the counties would be served by state probate court judges started January 1st, 2031, unless there's some kind of vacancy in the meantime, in which case that county would be worked into the state probate court. And if there aren't enough judges, the chief justice can ask the governor to appoint another judge, which is basically the structure of the original bill, just switching around the timeline of when the state probate judges start serving. Let's see, if we look on page 19, there are several provisions of this bill. This is just one of many which have to be updated because you passed a bill that was on the governor's desk, held by the governor over the interim, about who pays for attorneys appointed in probate court proceedings. And so the bill has to be amended to recognize that that law will have taken effect without her signature at the end of the year. I mean, at 90 days after the session is over. So you have to amend the new provisions of law. So that's what a lot of this shading is. Anytime you see due to enactment of Public Law 2025, Chapter 511, that's my direction to the revisor's office, but it's a signal to you that it's updating it based on that changed law. If we look starting on page 2022, so this is Part C of the bill. Part C of the bill takes effect when the first state court judges start serving in York, Kennebec, Somerset, and Aroostook counties. So that's January 1st, 2029. There was nothing in Part C of the bill, however, that addressed judicial supervision of the registers. So What this does is take all of the statutes in the probate code now that talk about the county judge supervising the register, and it provides that during this transition period between, if that is a state, if that particular court is served by a state probate judge, then that state probate judge who's presiding over proceedings in that county is the supervisor. If it's still a county probate judge, they retain those supervisory duties. So that's what the changes are there. And then we have more changes on the next couple of pages having to do with it, who pays for the attorney. And again, that's based on the enactment of the new law. Let's see. And if we go to page 35, it's on the bottom of page 34, the top of 35, there was one judicial supervision statute that wasn't included in the original bill. So this is adding that in. And then let's see, the rest of them are the other judicial supervision statutes. And just for fun, I know that Senator Carney appreciated this. I don't know if anyone else does, but remember I told you Part C takes effect when the first state probate judges sit on the bench. Part D is going to take effect when all of them are state probate judges. And so reorganizing Title IV, so it's a streamlined, these are the rules for the state probate judge, means you're changing section numbers in between 2029 and 2031. So the only way to make that happen is the stuff in Part C like repeals itself as of January 1st, 2031, and we create all new language in Part D as of January 1st, 2021. So you're going to see a lot of repeats in here. That's hopefully not due to a mistake. It's hopefully on purpose for that reason. So I just wanted to explain, because you can't like amend a section in Part C and then amend it further in Part D. I couldn't get away with that. So that's why it's very repetitive. But the meat sort of what we don't know yet about this amendment is going to be what's Part E, starting on page 36. And this will be created through the fiscal note process. And that's the funding for the positions for the judicial branch, the funding for the new judge positions, the funding to the Commission on Public Defense Services to compensate attorneys appointed where there is a statutory right to an attorney at state expense in those proceedings under the Maine Uniform Probate Code. And then to provide funding to the judicial branch, which will be responsible for overseeing and paying court-appointed visitors when it's a state judge who appoints them. So we don't know the numbers yet, but this language has also been given to OFPR and the revisor's office. So that's how it will look, as opposed to just having the summary, which is all you had before.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jana. Are there any questions, committee members? Representative Lee?
The transition language on the first page, I get what the second part of it is saying, which is in order to effectuate this, the judicial branch might need to enact administrative orders or ethics rules, etc. I don't understand what the first part of it means about overseeing the transition. Is this language that exists elsewhere and is just sort of similar to that?
This is language that was requested specifically by the Chief Justice. So I think it's sort of explaining why you need some orders and procedural rules, because there's a transition between the two. It's kind of flowery, but it's unallocated sort of language. We do have transition type language a lot, but it's usually much more specific to like you've changed the name of something so they can still use the letterhead until it's all used up, things like that.
Do you have a follow-up?
I think it's the overseeing part that is there any effect to the overseeing portion of this?
I think the only thing that might be doing beyond allowing the rules is in some sense, you're charging them with making sure it's working right. It might be better to be clear about that. I mean, that's not what was asked for, is different language. This is the language that was asked for. But if you want to add more meat to it, you could say how you want them to oversee it. If you want them to examine certain things, there is a study in Part D of the bill, which is the study 2 years after everything's been incorporated, And it's comprised of the same types of people who were on the first study that created this proposed process. And those folks would be looking at how is it working? Are different financial or staff resources required? Should the case management systems be incorporated? Should the registries be incorporated? All the other questions that haven't yet been addressed. So they're definitely responsible for doing that study later. But this may be suggesting that in the meantime, the SJC is really looking at how this is working and making sure it happens right. It's not that nobody's in charge, they're the ones in charge.
Senator Carney?
Thank you. And I do think, a great example is that there will be a project manager retained to carry out this process, but the project manager somebody has to decide who that project manager is going to be and then be available to answer questions or point that project manager in the right direction to get those questions answered. I did also want to raise something else, which is that since the time that we voted on this legislation, I've heard from several folks, including one probate judge, speaking again about or asking to pay closer attention to the role of the registers during this transition process. And by pay attention, I mean not whether or not they're doing a good job, but really whether we should be thinking about incorporating the registers into the court system as well. And so what I'd like to suggest is that we have some additional language in that transition paragraph that asks I guess I'm not sure who would be the appropriate person to direct, but perhaps the Chief Justice to convene a stakeholder transition team to look specifically at issues related to whether, how the transition is impacting the registers and how it might be possible to bring the registers into the state court system as well. One example is, during the commission process, we were really determined to keep the register in each county because that's somebody who already has an existing relationship with the county who serves in a different way than other court personnel do. And in making that transition, if they were to come into the judicial branch, we wouldn't want to change either that relationship or the ability to assist members of the public who are accomplishing probate matters without a lawyer. But that's something that needs to be really carefully thought through. And I don't think we can come up with the language to do it now. But I would like us to consider amending the transition section of the bill to create a task force or a body that's responsible for paying attention to that concern and asking the question during this transition process, should the registers also become part of the judicial branch? And if they should, how can we do that in a way that preserves the really valuable aspects of the current register system? So that's what I would like us to consider.
Representative Sinclair?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Am I correct in remembering / believing that in order to transition the registers as well, we would need a separate modification to the Constitution? I had a memory that might have been part of why they were not included in this overall transition effort, because that earlier amendment had already taken place, but I could be wrong.
So the provision of the Constitution that was contingently repealed pending legislation being enacted in 1967 is about the election of registers and probate judges. So part of what this bill does, even before the majority committee amendment, is provide for the statutory election of registers, because otherwise there's no provision for it. So that's the only thing that I think, and I'm sure this is something the working group or task force would have to look into, is the way the bill is structured with the amendment now is this group, a couple of years after everything's implemented, is going to look at potential changes. And that's a while down the road Whereas maybe this working group could talk about it earlier, because whenever you make this change, you're going to have to let folks who've been elected to their 4-year term of office as a registrar serve that term out. You can't take away the election that they won. That would violate the Constitution, which is why the bill is so complicated for judges as well.
Representative Lee?
For Senator Carney, is the idea that this transition group that's monitoring that issue would report back to the legislature?
Potentially, yes, with proposed, so the judicial branch can ask this committee to bring forth legislation. They don't need special authority to do so, but they could, they could of their own initiative say, we found a way to make this work and we would like to go ahead with it. And so I do think, am I wrong, Jen, or is that correct?
So if you want to direct SJC, or I guess you could invite them, we can talk about, I don't know if you can direct or not direct, that's up to you. But if you want to have the Supreme Judicial Court convene some kind of working group or task force to specifically examine incorporation of registries while preserving the great attributes they already have, it probably would be helpful to give them a certain date to report back. And you would need to specifically say that the judiciary community can report out legislation, or else you have to get the joint order and everything else.
Okay. So thank you for pointing out the appropriate process. I can answer your question now, Representative Lee, but I think Janet has already done justice to your question. Yeah, and I think that the language that you used, Janet, describing the purpose of the working group is right on target for what I think would accomplish those ends.
And does, it seems like that working group reporting back next January might be really soon. 2 Januaries would be more time, but you still would not have but very much of a state judicial, state probate court yet, if the first ones are starting January 1st, 2029. So if you had them report, the working group report back January 15th, they would have had 14 days of experience of having state probate judges. So I don't know when you want them to report back. It will mean that this transition thing will become allocated law, because it's going to extend beyond this legislature.
Okay. So as I'm thinking through this, I think that we need to work a little bit more on the language and the dates before we reconsider, because I don't want there to be a vacuum during which nobody's thinking about this, because I do think as we're going to learn a lot as we start to make this transition for the judges, and whether or not to make the same transition for the registers should be something that is reflected on throughout the process. And so I think we need some better language and maybe interim reports back to this committee.
Are you able to work with Janet to refine that language?
Yes, and we'll both work with the judicial branch as well.
Great. And so, Janet, it's language review, so we don't need to formally table. We're just not going to
No,
approve
so
the
this
language
is
this time.
preliminary. I think even if we're going to add that piece, or if you're going to vote to add that piece, it still is helpful for the rest of it to be processed and get the fiscal numbers processed, so that can keep going, and we can just, at some point, whenever you're ready, add another section and ask the revisor's office and the fiscal and office to just look at that section and see if it changes anything.
Okay. Committee members, are there any further questions on the bill overall or with respect to those proposed changes? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you. Do we have any other work this afternoon, Janet? No. Okay.
Nice.
Well, thank you. Do we have a motion to adjourn? All right, Representative Sato, Representative Poirier, all in favor?